Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Greece on July 29th, 2025. Today, I'd like to do a deep dive into the latest deceptions of the genocidal Trump regime. But before I do that, I'd like to talk to you about the liberation of Georges Abdullah. For those of you who know little of Abdullah's past, here's a summary. Abdullah was freed last week from a French prison after 41 years of imprisonment. He's a Lebanese revolutionary who came from Lebanon's Maronite Christian community. Born in 1951 in the northern Lebanese town of Al-Kubayat, Abdullah joined the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, or SSNP, and then fought against Israel's invading forces in 1978, in the course of which he was wounded. In late 1970s, he formed the Lebanese Armed Revolutionary Factions with the assistance of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In 1987, Abdullah was sentenced by a French court to life imprisonment for alleged complicity in the 1982 assassinations of Israeli diplomat Yaakov Bar Simantov and U.S. Assistant Military Attaché Lieutenant Colonel Charles Ray. It's believed that the assassinations were retaliation for the U.S.-Israeli war crimes committed during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. In that invasion, Israel, with extensive U.S. and other Western backing, massacred approximately 20,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, most of whom were children. By 1999, Abdullah had served the minimum portion of his life sentence in French detention, but his requests for parole were all denied until 2003, when a French judge finally granted him parole. The U.S. government, then led by the war criminal George W. Bush, aggressively interfered in the French legal process by pressuring French authorities to deny parole to Abdullah. In 2013, Abdullah was again granted parole on condition that he agreed to be deported from France and never return. Again, however, the U.S. government, now led by former U.S. President Barack Obama, intervened, with Victoria Nuland declaring that Washington's opposition to Abdullah's parole was implacable. And at that time, Nuland was a senior official in the U.S. State Department. Predictably, Paris capitulated to U.S. pressure yet again. Upon his release from prison last week, Abdullah returned promptly to his native Lebanon. At the airport in Beirut, the liberated freedom fighter wasted no time in calling for greater resistance to Israel's extermination of the Palestinian people. Here's what Abdullah had to say.
بتطلع فيها بتشوف هياكل عظمية عم تتحرك وفي ملايين العرب قاعدين بيتفرجوا في ملايين في مصر على بعد أمتار من أزهر مصر على بعد أمتار من كعبة محمد بن عبد الله أطفال فلسطين بيموتوا جوع على بعد أمتار من 80 مليون من أتباع محمد بن عبد الله في مصر أطفال فلسطين بيموتوا من الجوع. هذا معيب للتاريخ بحق الجماهير العربية أكثر من الأنظمة بنعرفها. ما فيش كم شهيد سقط في المظاهرات هو ما يحاول يقتحم غزة. ما فيش، ما حداش سقط. لو بينزل مظاهرة من 2,000,000 مصري ما بيبقاش المجزرة، ما بيبقاش حرب الإبادة. المسألة بتتوقف على جماهير مصر بالتحديد أكثر من أي طرف آخر. مناضلي العالم عم بيتحملوا مسؤولياتهم حتى كل عربي يشعر بالخجل في أعماقه. لما بنت اسمها من السويد بتيجي عمرها 20 سنة جريتا 20 سنة بتيجي مقابل غزة، بالوقت اللي ملاحي مصر قاعدين بيتفرجوا وما يقولوا نصيبهم بالجنة. تفضلوا يورجونا الجنة إنه ما يقتحموا حدود غزة. رسالتي إنه نلتف حول المقاومة أكثر من أي وقت مضى. اليوم أكثر من أي وقت مضى. هياكل عظمية للأطفال عم بتشوفوها أنتم، هياكل عظمية للأطفال عم تتحرك وفي ملايين العرب بيتفرجوا. من المعيب على كل عربي انه يتفرج. عم تيجي جريتا عمرها 17 سنه 18 سنه تيجي من السويد لحتى تتضامن مع غزه. نحن بنسال وين ابناء مصر؟ وين بنات مصر؟ وين نساوين مصر؟ وين رجال مصر؟
جورج شو حتكمل
المناضلين؟ وين الجماهير العاديه؟ حد ادنى من الكرامه. لما بنقول في بمصر 104 ملايين، كم مليون نزل في الشارع؟ يكفي انه ينزل 1,000,000 واحد على حدود غزه تتنتهي المذبحه، تتنتهي حرب الاباده. مليون واحد.
Now, you will have seen that Georges Abdullah referred a few times in that speech that he delivered at the airport in Beirut to a young Swedish woman by the name of Greta. Of course, he was referring to the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, who several weeks ago was aboard a Freedom Flotilla coalition vessel called the Madeleine, was intercepted, as has happened repeatedly over the past 15 or so years, by Israeli forces in international waters, which was, by the way, a violation of international law. And the passengers, including Greta, were forcibly taken, kidnapped, in fact, and taken into Israel, where they did not intend to go or want to go. And then, after a brief imprisonment, they were deported from the country. This is standard illegal Israeli operating procedure when it confronts vessels of the Freedom Flotilla coalition. Now, whatever you may think of Abdullah's politics or his past activities, no objective observer would deny that this man is an individual of immense courage. When he made these statements, he had just emerged from 41 years in prison. Moreover, he made these statements in Lebanon, a country that has been devastated by Israel over the past 22 months and repeatedly attacked over a period of decades, as he himself knows personally, having been wounded in combat with Israeli forces on his native soil. After all the carnage Lebanon has experienced, including Israel's countless assassinations of Lebanese resistance leaders, it's clear that Israel's genocidal regime is more than capable of killing Abdullah in Lebanon. After 4 decades in prison, Abdullah could have said with some justification that he has sacrificed enough for the resistance and that he's decided at the age of 74 to live out his life in peace and quiet. But he did not do that, and he wasted no time in doing the opposite. On the contrary, by calling out the Arab regimes and effectively calling for the people of Egypt to rise up against the dictator Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Abdullah put another target on his own back. It's not just the Israelis who will be incensed by Abdullah's statements in Beirut. Of course, Sisi will as well, and other Arab autocracies who fear an uprising within their own subjugated countries. That, my friends, is what real resistance looks like. Georges Abdullah is a true revolutionary, and never was there a time when the world needed such revolutionaries as this man. After Abdullah spoke in Lebanon, the resistance in Gaza echoed Abdullah's call to action. On a military media Telegram channel, the resistance issued the following statement. We call for severing all ties with the Israeli enemy. We urge the masses of the nation and the free people of the world to express their anger at what is happening in free Gaza. And they continue, O our people in Jordan, the land of steadfastness and resistance, we look to you with hope and brotherhood. Just as your sons were martyred on Palestine's borders, we call on you to intensify your efforts and movement to stop this horrific genocide and prevent the enemy from dividing Al-Aqsa and imposing the so-called alternative homeland. O our people and brothers in Egypt, the land of kinship, we address you from a place of respect for Egypt's political and societal status. We know you feel the pain of your people in Gaza. O people of Egypt, its leaders, army, tribes, Al-Azhar, and churches, can your brothers in Gaza die of hunger at your border? We fully trust that great Egypt will take a decisive stance. Gaza will not starve, and Rafah crossing must not remain closed. Notably, the Western corporate media have totally ignored Abdullah's call to the Egyptian people, as they have ignored the resistance's echoing of that call. And it's for that reason, above all else, that I thought it important to share this information with our audience. The question, of course, for Palestinians is whether the people of Egypt and other Arab states will hear of Abdullah's call and will embrace the urgency of the moment. Now, let's turn to the subject of Trump's response to Israel's mass starvation of Palestinians. I've been saying for the past 20 months or so that the Gaza ceasefire negotiations are nothing but kabuki theater. In my view, we now have ironclad proof that that is so. Last week, the Trump regime effectively killed the so-called negotiations over a Gaza ceasefire, even though Hamas continued to engage with the U.S. government in those negotiations. We learned of the collapse of those negotiations when the U.S. State Department issued a statement from Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. This was a few days ago. And here's what the State Department had to say.
Hello, everybody. All right. To begin, a few comments at the top, and then I'll be happy to take some questions. So first, a statement from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Quote, We have decided to bring our team home from Doha for consultations after the latest response from Hamas, which clearly shows a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. While the mediators have made a great effort, Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. We will now consider alternative options to bring the hostages home and try to create a more stable environment for the people of Gaza. It is a shame that Hamas has acted in this selfish way. We are resolute in seeking an end to this conflict and a permanent peace in Gaza. This week, the United States is advancing a bold and proactive foreign policy that reflects our enduring commitment to peace and security and prosperity for the American people.
Now, before I comment on the substance of Witkoff's statement, I must say that State Department spokesperson, Tommy Pigott, is rather annoying. Seconds before he revealed the U.S. will continue, along with Israel, to perpetrate a genocide, Pigott was seen grinning from ear to ear. That was reminiscent of Biden's State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. Some of you will know Caitlin Johnstone referred to Miller as Smirkula because he looks like Dracula and had an appalling habit of smirking as he defended Israel's demonic behavior. Well, Smirkula has been replaced by Grinkula. Returning to Witkoff's statement, Witkoff accused Hamas of acting in bad faith. He did not cite, however, a scintilla of evidence to support that serious allegation. In fact, Witkoff, in his statement, disclosed no new evidence or information about Hamas's negotiating position. The only information Witkoff cited in support of his claim that Hamas is acting in bad faith is that Hamas refuses to disarm. This, according to Witkoff, is a red line for Israel. We have known of Hamas's position on that issue for many months, however. Hamas has never indicated that it is prepared to disarm so long as Israel remains armed to the teeth and refuses to give the Palestinians a state. A refusal to disarm has always been the position, not just of Hamas, but all of the armed resistance groups in occupied Palestine. Moreover, by the standard of international law, it's an entirely reasonable position. As a matter of international law, the Palestinians have a right to armed resistance against the military forces that oppress them, especially after they have exhausted all peaceful options to their own liberation. Moreover, it's absurd to suggest that the victims of a genocide must disarm while the perpetrators of that genocide retain every deadly weapon known to humanity. As a matter of international law, Israel is also obliged to give the Palestinian peoples a state. The Palestinians have a right to self-determination, and the UN has repeatedly called for a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. A Palestinian state on the 1967 borders, by the way, would be a fantastic deal for Israel because it would give the Zionist settlers about 80% of historic Palestine, even though the Palestinian population constitutes about 50% of the total population of historic Palestine, and at the time of Israel's creation, constituted a significant majority of the population of historic Palestine. Nonetheless, Israel will not even give the Palestinians a state along the 1967 borders. On the contrary, Israel has continued to expand settlements in the West Bank in flagrant violation of international law, as has been recognized again and again by the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council. Another obstacle to the ceasefire agreement has been Israel's refusal to withdraw its forces from the whole of the Gaza Strip. But last year, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion that Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank is illegal. And here I want to share with you an excerpt from a statement that was issued at the time of that decision by UN human rights experts, including the Special Rapporteur for Occupied Palestine, Francesca Albanese. And they say, the landmark ruling of 19 July 2024 declared that Israel's occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is unlawful, along with the associated settlement regime, annexation, and use of natural resources. The court added that Israel's legislation and measures violate the international prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid. The ICJ mandated Israel to end its occupation, dismantle its settlements, provide full reparations to Palestinians, the victims in the Palestinian population, and facilitate the return of displaced people. So, Israel's obligation to withdraw from all of the Gaza Strip is not contingent on Hamas's release of its prisoners of war. By withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, Israel would not be making a concession to Hamas. It would simply be complying with its obligations under international law. All of these facts highlight just how restrained Hamas's negotiating position has been. From the very beginning, Hamas has said it's willing to release Israeli prisoners of war without any commitment by Israel to give the Palestinians a state, as it is obliged to do. Hamas has stated repeatedly that it's willing to release its prisoners of war without a commitment from Israel to stop settlement expansion in the West Bank, which Israel is obliged to do. And in fact, it's obliged to do more than stop settlement expansion. As I've just shown to you, the ICJ ruled that it is obliged to dismantle the settlements. A second point I want to highlight from Witkoff's statement is its stunning hypocrisy. Witkoff and the regime he represents have taken bad faith to a whole new level. In March, Israel broke the most recent ceasefire agreement with Hamas by refusing to honor its commitment to remove its troops from Rafah in the Gaza Strip. Israel then began starving the civilian population of Gaza and resumed its relentless bombardment of the Strip. It did all of this with the full-throated support of the Trump regime. In addition, and again with the full-throated support of the Trump regime, Israel violated its ceasefire agreement with Lebanon. It has violated that ceasefire agreement thousands of times since that agreement was reached in late 2024. The US and France are supposed to be the guarantors of the Lebanon ceasefire agreement. At the time that that agreement was announced, I expressed on this program deep skepticism and surprise at the notion that the US and France could be counted upon to act as guarantors of the ceasefire agreement. And I offered the view that Hezbollah was being naive in agreeing to designate those two countries as guarantors of the ceasefire agreement with Israel. And sure enough, in a brazen display of bad faith, the Trump regime has done nothing to restrain Israel's ceaseless attacks on Lebanon. On the contrary, it has sought to justify them and has enabled them. Third, and perhaps this is the most flagrant example of Witkoff's and Trump's bad faith, with their knowledge, approval, and material support, Israel attacked Iran at a time when Iran was engaged in negotiations with the US over its nuclear energy program. Israel's criminal attacks on Iran began just a few days before Iranian and US representatives were scheduled to meet for further round of talks. At the time of those attacks, Israeli media boasted that the negotiations with Iran were an elaborate deception operation, that's the phrase they used, designed to lull the Iranians into a false sense of security. And prior to that deception being perpetrated, Witkoff engaged in another act of bad faith along with his boss, Donald Trump, when he moved the goalposts in the course of the negotiations. He started out by suggesting quite clearly that the Trump administration or regime was prepared to countenance some level of enrichment by the Iranian government, uranium enrichment. But when the Iranians began to negotiate seriously over the level of enrichment they would be permitted to pursue under any deal with the United States, suddenly Witkoff and Trump announced that they would not tolerate any uranium enrichment whatsoever, despite the fact, of course, that the United States has the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world and is the only state to ever use these weapons of mass destruction, and is violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by not pursuing, as it's obliged to do under that treaty, nuclear disarmament. And despite the fact that Israel itself is in possession of a nuclear arsenal and does not subject its nuclear arsenal to any of its nuclear energy program to international inspection because it refuses to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and is the only country in West Asia that is not a member of that treaty. And so in these circumstances, Witkoff and Trump moved the goalposts and said, we will not tolerate any nuclear enrichment by Iran, which is Iran's right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So who is this charlatan, Steve Witkoff, to lecture others about bad faith? Witkoff is the crown prince of bad faith. And while I'm on the subject of Steve Witkoff, what success has this man had in his supposed role of Donald Trump's peace envoy? After 7 months on the job, Witkoff has succeeded at nothing more than jet-setting around the world at taxpayer expense and bamboozling Americans into thinking that Trump is serious about peace. For example, the Ukraine war continues, and if anything, the fighting in Ukraine has escalated. The US continues to arm Ukraine and is now threatening additional sanctions on Russia. And just 2 days ago, Trump said that the 50-day deadline he had given to Russia to stop the fighting before further sanctions were imposed by the US government on Russia had been shortened in his unilateral discretion to 10 to 12 days. So he's actually escalating the economic and military warfare against the Russian Federation, despite all of the purported efforts of him and his peace envoy to bring that war to an end. What about conditions in the Gaza Strip? Well, there was an early sign of promise from the Trump administration, of course, when on the day before Trump resumed his second administration, Israel and the resistance entered into a ceasefire agreement. But as I've mentioned, with the full-throated support and enablement of the Trump regime, Israel violated that ceasefire agreement and began to inflict even worse punishment upon the people, the devastated people of the Gaza Strip, than it had imposed upon them prior to the ceasefire. And then, of course, there is the series of nuclear negotiations with Iran. Those have been, by any rational measure, a disastrous failure. And the very reason that they have been a failure is not because of Iran's refusal to engage and to negotiate over its right under international law to enrich uranium, but it's because, as I mentioned, the Trump regime used the negotiations as a ploy to lull the Iranians into a false sense of security. When you add it all up, Witkoff's record as Trump's peace envoy is one of monumental failure. Monumental failure is precisely what we should have expected from a New York real estate mogul who is Trump's golfing buddy and who had no experience in diplomacy, international relations, Russia, or West Asia when he assumed this vitally important position. The only thing Steve Witkoff has achieved during the past 7 months is making himself complicit in a genocide and a war of aggression. Steve Witkoff is now a war criminal, and he should be indicted and prosecuted as such by the International Criminal Court and not be feted by governments around the world and the Western corporate media. So how did Hamas respond to Witkoff's statement? Notably, on July 27th, Hamas expressed shock at Witkoff's claim that the negotiations had gone badly. And here's what Hamas had to say. I'm quoting here, "The leadership of the resistance has mobilized all its tools and connections over 22 months to stop the aggression against the people of Gaza. The enemy's chief of staff is covering up his army's failure through mass extermination. We conducted tough negotiations and showed maximum flexibility without compromising our national principles. We responded positively to the mediators at every stage of what was proposed to us. In the latest round of negotiations, we achieved clear progress and reached substantial agreement on the proposals presented by the mediators. We agreed with the mediators on key issues such as withdrawal, captives, and aid. The occupation's withdrawal from the latest negotiation round, along with the alignment of the American envoy with it, is a blatant maneuver to waste time and commit further massacres. The mediators had relayed to us positive responses from the Israeli side during the last round, but we were shocked by the enemy's withdrawal, accompanied by the U.S. envoy." Clearly, someone is lying about why these negotiations collapsed. Either it's Israel or it's the resistance. In situations such as this, I myself apply a simple rule of thumb. When claims made by the oppressor and the oppressed cannot be reconciled, and there is no objective way to determine who's telling the truth, I assume that the oppressor is lying. And I do so for two reasons. First, it is in the very nature of oppressors to lie. And second, I always stand as a matter of principle with the oppressed and never with the oppressor. Now, returning to Witkoff's statement, he said that the U.S. would now pursue, quote, alternative options, close quote. During the Q&A portion of the State Department press conference, which I showed you a few minutes ago, Trump's spokesperson refused to specify, despite repeated questioning, what those alternative options might be. Well, thanks to Trump himself, we soon gained considerable insight into what his administration means by alternative options. Here are comments that Trump made to the press as he was disembarking from Air Force One.
They pulled out of Gaza. They pulled out in terms of negotiating. It was too bad. Hamas didn't really want to make a deal. I think they want to die, and it's very, very bad.
Are you done?
And it got to be to a point where you're going to have to finish the job. They really they asked for things. Don't forget, we got a lot of hostages out. So now we're down to the final hostages, and they know what happens after you get the final hostages. And basically, because of that, they really didn't want to make a deal. I saw that. So they pulled out, and they're going to have to fight, and they're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to get rid of it.
That's right, folks. The resistance wants to die. That is the Donald's latest incredible claim. Now, as you heard, he said quite clearly that Israel is going to have to finish the job. He said this as Palestinian children are starving to death before the eyes of the world. What interpretation can we impose upon that other than that Israel should continue doing precisely what it is doing, which is not only starving the civilian population of Gaza, but also bombing it relentlessly and shooting civilians, including children, starving civilians who assemble for scraps of food from American and Israeli soldiers who have been designated to use humanitarian aid effectively as bait to expedite the mass slaughter of Palestinians. That is the job that Israel is doing. It is the job that Israel has been doing for months. So when Donald Trump says Israel must finish the job, the most rational interpretation is that he is giving a green light to Israel to complete the extermination of the Palestinian people. Every day, my friends, Trump descends deeper and deeper into unspeakable depravity. Watch this.
Should Israel be doing more to allow food into Gaza?
What did you say?
Should Israel be doing more to allow food into Gaza?
Well, you know, we gave $60 million 2 weeks ago, and nobody even acknowledged it, for food. And it's terrible. You know, you really at least want to have somebody say thank you. No other country gave anything. We gave $60 million 2 weeks ago for food for Gaza. And nobody acknowledged it. Nobody talks about it. And it makes you feel a little bad when you do that and, you know, you have other countries not giving anything.
First of all, it's my understanding that the Trump regime did not give $60 million in food aid, but that it was actually substantially less than that. But let's say it was $60 million. First of all, what is the point of giving food aid when the murderous regime that you are enabling refuses to distribute that aid in anything other than a deadly genocidal manner? Secondly, are we seriously to believe that the Palestinians should be grateful to Donald Trump after he has provided, as did his predecessor Joe Biden, the mountain of munitions which Israel has used to demolish the entirety of the Gaza Strip? Is this man serious? But the worst part of all, perhaps, of this degenerate tirade is that he didn't answer the question. Not explicitly at any rate. The question, the one which he seemed incapable of hearing without assistance, was, do you think Israel should provide more aid to the Palestinian people? And by deflecting to the question of whether the United States government had been shown adequate appreciation by the starving Palestinian people, the implication is that he doesn't think that Israel should provide more aid because the Palestinians haven't been sufficiently appreciative of the Donald's magnificent generosity. In any event, there should now be no doubt in anyone's mind that this endless ceasefire negotiation is a charade, and it's always been a charade. Time and again, we've been told by the corporate media and by governments and by mediators that the parties to these negotiations have made good progress, that a deal is just around a corner, that the mediators are optimistic, and blah, blah, blah. If I had $1 for every media report about the so-called progress in the ceasefire negotiations, I'd be richer than Elon Musk. No, my friends, it's all kabuki theater, and it has been kabuki theater from the very beginning. Now, why do I insist upon this point? Why is it important to understand that the ceasefire negotiations are a charade? Because once you have understood that Israel and the US have no intention of stopping the genocide, it becomes immediately apparent that the salvation of the Palestinian people depends upon us. It depends upon people of conscience around the world, and in particular, in the West. It depends primarily upon every citizen of the West because it is the West that provides to Israel the means it requires to carry out this genocide and protects Israel from accountability in international institutions. Those of us living in the West must force our governments to put an end to this horror. The Palestinians don't need your sympathy. They don't need your tears. They don't even need your indignation. What they need is your action. At this stage, if you live in the West and are taking no action to stop this Holocaust, then the blood of Palestinians lies upon your conscience too. Why? Because without the support of your Western government, Israel would never have been able to sustain the genocide for 22 months. Your government, moreover, is funded with your taxes. Your government is in power because the voters in your country put them there. Your government purports to speak in your name. You are therefore responsible for the crimes of your government, and it is your duty to do everything you can to stop its crimes, especially when the crime is the ultimate one, the crime of genocide. So, what does real pressure look like? Well, for those of you who might have a question in your mind about that, here's an example. Now, I just want to pause the video there. Take a look at this character on the left. I don't know who this person is, but I think we can reasonably infer that this person is a senior police officer because he himself is not in full riot gear and is not engaged directly in the dirty business of using human beings who are protesting against a genocide as pretzels. And he's standing there looking very much like my conception of a German Nazi. And frankly, my friends, what we have witnessed in Germany over the course of this genocide can only be described as the modern form of Nazism. Now, there are some signs that all this pressure is having an impact, at least upon European governments. Within the past few weeks, as images of starving Palestinian children have emerged from Gaza, European governments have issued an avalanche of statements condemning Israel and demanding an end to the slaughter. So too, by the way, has the Canadian government. Here is one example. This is the EU's foreign policy representative, the former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. She states, and this was on July 22nd, the killing of civilians seeking aid in Gaza is indefensible. I spoke again with Gideon Saar to recall our understanding on aid flow and made clear that the IDF must stop killing people at distribution points. All options remain on the table if Israel doesn't deliver on its pledges. This statement is notable for a few reasons. Kaja Kallas has done everything in her power to obstruct any kind of concrete action by the European Union against Israel's genocidal regime. But I don't recall a time during this horror show when she explicitly acknowledged, prior to this occasion, that the Israeli military is killing people at distribution points, nor have I seen an explicit threat of this nature, at least reasonably explicit, when she stated that all options remain on the table if Israel doesn't deliver on its pledges. And by the way, I've also screen captured here a response to this particular statement by Kaja Kallas by someone who goes by the name on X of Zionism Observer. And this person accurately observes that nobody is falling for this anymore. You allowed this. And then a Zionism Observer attaches a post that the same account put out on July 18th, observing that just 3 days ago, in other words, on July 15th, Kaja Kallas stopped the EU from sanctioning Israel over genocide and crimes against humanity. So I don't assume, nobody should assume, that if we don't escalate the pressure, the EU will finally do the right thing and impose severe sanctions on the genocidal entity. But the fact that this character, Kaja Kallas, is willing to employ this kind of language is at least a step in the right direction, and is some evidence that the leaders of the European Union are feeling the heat as a result of the visible daily broadcasts of the starvation of Palestinian children. Now, we've also seen evidence of the pressure being felt in the halls of power in Europe in other quarters as well. Here is a statement that was put out by Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, on July 24th. The suffering and starvation unfolding in Gaza is unspeakable and indefensible. While the situation has been grave for some time, it has reached new depths and continues to worsen. We are witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe. Well, this has obviously been true for people of conscience for 22 months. Finally, Sir Keir Starmer appears to have gotten the memo. He then goes on and says, I will hold an emergency call with E3 partners tomorrow, where we will discuss what we can do urgently to stop the killing and get people the food they desperately need while pulling together all the steps necessary to build a lasting peace. We agree on the pressing need for Israel to change course and allow the aid that is desperately needed to enter Gaza without delay. It is hard to see a hopeful future in such dark times, to which Sir Keir Starmer has contributed enormously, by the way. And he goes on and says, but I must reiterate my call for all sides to engage in good faith and at pace to bring about an immediate ceasefire and for Hamas to unconditionally release all hostages. We strongly support the efforts of the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt to secure this. We are clear that statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. A ceasefire will put us on a path to the recognition of a Palestinian state and two-state solution which guarantees peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis. Now, before I move on to talk about additional signs that the leaders, the so-called leaders of the European Union, are feeling the heat, I want to comment on the fact that both Starmer and really every other leader of every Western country and the corporate media continuously refer to the 20 or so Israelis who remain in the custody of the resistance in the Gaza Strip as hostages. These persons, it has been widely reported, were serving in the Israeli military at the time that they were seized by the forces of the resistance on October 7th, 2023. And it's important to note that in and of itself is a very important consideration, but also they were seized, all or most of them, at military bases that ring the Gaza concentration camp. Those military bases are used to do a variety of things in violation of international law. They're used and have always been used to prevent the Palestinian refugees in Gaza from exercising their lawful right to return to their homeland. They have been used to gun down peaceful, unarmed Palestinians who approach the fence that separates the Gaza Strip from the homeland of those Palestinian refugees. And we saw this in all its horror during the Great March of Return in 2018 and 2019, when soldiers based at those military facilities that were attacked by the resistance on October 7th, 2023, gunned down mercilessly and in broad daylight unarmed Palestinians who were approaching the fence, including children, disabled persons, and medics. So they are not, by any stretch of the imagination, hostages. They are prisoners of war. And in fact, once they are taken out of the custody of the resistance in Gaza, if in fact they survive what Israel is doing to Gaza, they shouldn't be returned to Israel. They should be handed over to The Hague for investigation and for potential prosecution in the war crimes in which they very likely participated during their time in the Israeli military. They're not only, it's not only the case that they aren't hostages, it is also the case that they are likely war criminals. Now, at the same time as they are being flagrantly mischaracterized by Western governments and by the corporate media as hostages, these characters, people like Sir Keir Starmer and so-called journalists in the corporate media, say nothing about those who actually are hostages and who are far more numerous and are being held by Israel. Thousands of Palestinians are being held in appalling conditions. Most, if not all of them, are being subjected to various forms of torture. I mean, Israel's imagination is unlimited when it comes to finding ways to cause suffering to innocent people. And these people, the vast majority of them, or at least a great many of them, haven't been convicted of anything and haven't even been charged with anything. If anyone is a hostage, it is the people who are being held in appalling conditions, the Palestinians, in the dungeons of Israel, without any criminal conviction or criminal charge having been laid against them. Now, returning to Starmer's statement, things have gotten so bad for Sir Keir that in the British Parliament, both Labour and Conservative, yes, Conservative MPs, are warning of the Starmer regime's legal complicity in genocide. Have a look at this.
Earlier today, then, 31 countries put out a powerful message. The war must end now. There must be aid going into Gaza, unrestricted. The hostages must be released, and all parties must uphold international law. It was sent to Israel, and by return, this powerful message was rejected. It was denounced by Israel as disconnected from reality.
Shocking.
So what now?
How can it be that we have a situation where IDF are firing at children, systematically going for head, stomach and testicles before their sport, and we have Rafah razed to the ground and this euphemistic humanitarian city being constructed, which the former Prime Minister of Israel called a concentration camp? When are we going to take the appropriate action to bring about comprehensive and full trade and arms embargo and concentrate the mind of Israel? Because nothing else is working. They're not listening. They're getting away with murder every single day.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like others in this House, I'm frankly astonished at the statement of the Foreign Secretary. At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on. He himself said there's a massive prison camp being constructed in the south of Gaza. He knows that leading genocide scholars from across the world now are ringing the alarm bells, and yet he has the temerity to show up to this House and wave his chequebook as if it's going to salve his conscience. Can he not see that his inaction and, frankly, cowardice is making this country irrelevant? Can he also not see the personal risk to him, given our international obligations, that he may end up at The Hague because of his inaction? And finally, really frankly, an appeal to the Labour backbenchers. We can't get your leadership to change their minds. Only you can, if you organise and insist on change.
Foreign Secretary.
That last MP who spoke, by the way, is Christopher Laurie Kit Malthouse, a British Conservative Party politician and businessman who has served as Member of Parliament in the UK since 2015 for a decade. What an extraordinary scene that a Conservative MP in the British Parliament is pleading with the backbenchers of the governing Labour Party to force the leadership of the party to bring an end to a genocide. And I have to say, as a Canadian, I'm not aware of a single member of Canada's Conservative Party who has made any such statements, not even a harsh criticism of Israel's genocidal rampage in Gaza, either inside or outside of the Canadian Parliament. On the contrary, led by a person by the name of Pierre Poilievre, whom I've dubbed the yapping Zionist Chihuahua, the entirety of the Conservative Party in Canada to this very day stands resolutely in support of the genocidal entity. Now, judging from important developments yesterday, Starmer is indeed feeling the heat. Starmer met with Trump in Britain and reportedly pressed Trump to act. Starmer's intervention elicited comments from Trump that were strikingly different from his statements he made only a few days earlier when he quite clearly greenlighted the extermination of Gaza's civilian population. As you can see here, and this is a report from yesterday in The Guardian, that Trump acknowledges real starvation in Gaza and tells Israel to let in every ounce of food. This meeting took place in the United Kingdom, where the Donald had gone to effectively promote a couple of money-losing golf courses he has there. And as you can see from this Guardian article, it appears that the Donald, after meeting with Sir Keir, suddenly has grown a bit of a conscience about Israel's genocide, acknowledging for the first time that there is real starvation in Gaza, and telling Israel to allow, quote, every ounce of food, close quote, into the devastated Gaza Strip. During his visit to Britain, Trump flatly contradicted the war criminal Netanyahu after the genocidal maniac claimed it was a, quote, bold-faced lie, close quote, to say Israel was causing hunger in Gaza. Trump told reporters that, in fact, Israel bore, quote, a lot of responsibility, close quote, for the crisis. For these and other reasons, there is growing evidence that grassroots pressure is having an effect. But to end the mass killing of Palestinians, it is essential, as George Abdullah proclaimed upon his liberation, that we escalate the pressure. That, by the way, is exactly what Yemen's Ansar Allah has decided to do. On July 27th, Ansar Allah issued an important statement. The statement reads, I found this on a resistance Telegram channel. Yemen, in the face of these horrific, brutal, and unprecedented massacres in our contemporary history, finds itself bound by a religious, moral, and humanitarian responsibility toward the oppressed who are being killed and devastated hourly by land, air, and sea bombardment, and subjected to starvation and thirst due to the suffocating and severe blockade on steadfast, proud Gaza. This is something no human being can accept, let alone Arabs and Muslims. Accordingly, the Yemeni armed forces, relying upon and trusting in Allah Almighty, have decided to escalate their support operations militarily and begin implementing the fourth phase of the naval blockade against the enemy. This phase includes targeting all ships belonging to any company dealing with the ports of the Israeli enemy, regardless of the company's nationality and regardless of where such ships may be, wherever the armed forces can reach them. The Yemeni armed forces warn all companies to immediately cease dealing with Israeli ports as of the moment of this statement's release. Otherwise, their ships, regardless of destination, will be targeted. Now, I take it from this sweeping statement, they made reference to all ships, regardless of nationality, that the Ansar Allah movement is effectively declaring its intention to attack vessels that are dealing with Israel's ports, transporting goods to Israel or from Israel, even if they are owned by an American corporation or even if they bear the United States flag, which would put the Donald in quite a quandary because he effectively ordered his military out of the Red Sea, his massive naval armada, when it proved utterly incapable of stopping Ansar Allah's attacks. Of course, if this were to happen, if Ansar Allah were to sink an American-flagged vessel or a vessel owned by an American corporation in the Red Sea, it is entirely plausible and, in fact, likely, given the Donald's record, that the United States would resume the bombardment of Yemen. It's absolutely extraordinary that this movement and the peoples of Yemen continue to stand by the Palestinian people after all the years of savagery that they have suffered at the hands of the United States, other Western governments, and their proxies in the region of West Asia. And it is nothing less than an obscenity that Western governments deem Ansar Allah to be a terrorist organization while treating Israel as a civilized nation and an ally. Now, around the same time that Ansar Allah announced the entry into the fourth phase of its solidarity strikes against Israel and Red Sea shipping, it made another interesting announcement. Here again from the military media Telegram channel, the Yemeni military media published on Monday, corresponding to July 28th, interviews with the crew of the Eternity Sea vessel, which was sunk by the Yemeni armed forces in the Red Sea. Now, this vessel and another vessel were sunk a couple of weeks ago by Ansar Allah's forces in the Red Sea. And at the time, I published a report on the origins and activities of these vessels. As I reported then, both of these vessels are owned by Greek corporations, or were owned by Greek corporations, or Greek shipping magnates, in fact. And a number of Greek shipping concerns have continued, including the two that were the owners of these vessels, to do business with the genocidal entity throughout these 22 months of genocide. And as I recall, the owner of the Eternity Sea, or an executive from the company that owned the Eternity Sea, denied that it was transporting goods to Israel. But according to Ansar Allah, the crew's statements, these were crew members who were taken into custody by Ansar Allah's forces, confirmed that the ship Eternity Sea had violated the ban on maritime navigation to ports in occupied Palestine. They stated that the port of al-Rashrash, Eilat, was the actual destination of the ship departing from Berbera port in Somalia, and that the Saudi port of Jeddah was listed for the purpose of deception and refueling. Several crew members confirmed that the captain of the ship did not inform them about the warning and order issued by the Yemeni naval forces to avoid passage. This, by the way, was another comment that I made at the time in my report on these incidents. I expressed amazement that the captain of the vessel had disregarded repeated and clear warnings from Ansar Allah to stop proceeding through the Red Sea in the direction of the port of Eilat. And finally, the statement of Ansar Allah states, the crew of Eternity Sea addressed messages to companies whose ships sailed toward Israeli ports, calling on them to refrain from trading or dealing with the Israelis, warning of the, quote, risk of meeting the same fate, close quote. Now, of course, I'm not in a position to confirm, verify the statements that Ansar Allah says were made to it by crew members of the Eternity Sea. But frankly, based on the history of these Greek shipping concerns, I find Ansar Allah's claims to be entirely plausible. As for the resistance in Gaza, an Israeli newspaper made a startling admission a few days ago. This is, again, a report from the military media channel on Telegram. It summarizes an article in the Hebrew newspaper Yedioth Achronoth. The government and army must realize that the situation in Gaza has flipped. There is little benefit from fighting with 5 divisions, more troops than defeated the Egyptian army in the October War, while the harm in terms of fighter casualties, Israel's international standing, and civilian suffering is only growing worse. It is absolutely mind-boggling that during this 2 months of barbarism, the lightly armed and starving Palestinian fighters have successfully resisted defeat at the hands of a military force that is larger, an Israeli military force that than the one that defeated the Egyptian military in the October War. 5 divisions. Absolutely astonishing. Now, yesterday, July 28th, something else happened that will undoubtedly escalate the pressure on the genocidal entity and its Western enablers. Namely, 2 Israeli human rights groups came out and declared, with the support of detailed reports, that the Israeli entity was committing the crime of genocide. The first of those human rights groups is the widely respected B'Tselem, and they stated on July 28th in a press release that their conclusion that Israel was committing genocide was unequivocal. And the other Israeli human rights organization that supported this conclusion was Physicians for Human Rights Israel. And this was a matter, as you can imagine, that garnered considerable international attention and even more attention within Israel itself. thanks to the pronouncements of B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, it will now be considerably harder for Zionists to claim plausibly that accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza is anti-Semitic or a blood libel. However, and as the chief editor of Electronic Intifada, Ali Abunimah, noted on X today, it is simply inexcusable that these two Israeli human rights organizations waited 22 months to make this declaration. As Ali correctly noted, it has been clear from day one, all the way back to October 2023, that Israel had embarked upon a genocide in the Gaza Strip. Nonetheless, it is also clear that the pressure is mounting. It will mount further as a result of these reports, and that the responsibility lies upon all of us to increase that pressure even more. Now, before signing off, I wanted to touch on a few other matters. I returned to Greece yesterday after having spent the last 2 months in Montreal. Yesterday, I stayed at a hotel in Exarchia. This is a district in central Athens that is famous, or infamous if you happen to be right-wing, for its tradition of anarchism. The hotel I stayed in is one in which I've stayed on numerous occasions. The reason I mention this is because when I checked in, as I was standing at the reception desk, there were two Israelis standing next to me, checking into the hotel as well. And one of them pulled out a large wad of euros and said that they wanted to pay for everything at the hotel in cash. At that moment, I happened to be wearing a T-shirt with the Palestinian flag and the word Palestine emblazoned on it. So I turned toward them to ensure that they saw my T-shirt, but they didn't react. Then, a few minutes later, after I checked in and deposited my suitcase in my room, I went out for lunch. And as I exited the hotel, another Israeli walked by me. I knew he was Israeli because he was speaking on his cell phone as he walked by, and he was speaking in Hebrew. So within 15 minutes of arriving at my hotel in Athens, I had two encounters with Israelis. Every time I come to Greece during the past 2 years, I see more and more Israelis, as a matter of fact. In October of last year, Reason to Resist published a report about all the Israelis who were moving to Cyprus. It was titled, "Israelis Flooding into Cyprus to Buy Everything in Sight." Although that report is more than 9 months old, it has had, in this month of July, the highest number of YouTube views of all the reports Reason to Resist has published to now. And obviously, therefore, the subject of Israelis flooding into countries near Israel is one that is of considerable interest to our audience. That's why I plan to return to Cyprus before the end of the summer, and we'll do another report on the influx of Israelis there. Recently, I can share with you that I was contacted by a knowledgeable person who resides in Cyprus, and he shared with me some very interesting information on Israel's quiet invasion of the island. So please stay tuned for that report. Another item I want to touch upon is that 1 year ago, we launched Reason to Resist with the goal of exposing the crimes of Western governments and empowering people to hold those governments accountable. 2 days ago, we surpassed the threshold of 90,000 subscribers. In fact, we're now at about 91,000 subscribers. And our goal is to reach 100,000 subscribers before the end of August and 150,000 before the end of the year. And of course, you can help us to reach those goals by subscribing if you're not already a subscriber, or by urging other like-minded people to do so. I also wanted to say a few words about the monetization of our channel, because once in a while, an audience member understandably complains about the frequency of the advertisements. It doesn't happen often, but it's happened a few occasions, and I felt obliged, therefore, to address it. I want to explain to you why we made the decision last year to monetize Reason to Resist after it reached the requisite threshold for subscribers and views. Operating this channel costs money. For example, we have an editing team and we compensate them for their fine work. We also pay for various subscriptions to software and news sites. We rent a studio where we do our videos in Montreal, and we also pay for the occasional use of an office space in Kalamata, Greece. And when I travel to do on-the-ground reporting, for example, my trip to Cyprus last year to report on Israelis who were moving there in large numbers, I obviously incur travel expenses, and they can be significant. During the time that our channel has been monetized, the monetization revenue has paid for most, but not all, of Reason to Resist's operating expenses. The difference between our operating expenses and the monetization revenue comes out of my own pocket. During the time that Reason to Resist has existed, as a matter of fact, I've lost money. I've not been paid a dime for the work that I've done as a reporter and the host of this channel. And in fact, I've been doing journalism for well over a decade. I started doing journalism in 2012 as a correspondent for the Real News Network, an independent media outlet based in Baltimore, Maryland. And during the thousands of hours that I committed to doing journalism at the Real News Network, I wasn't paid a dime for any of that either. I've been able to do journalism on a pro bono basis because of the income I've earned as a class actions lawyer. And to be clear, I don't criticize anyone for making a living from real journalism. Journalists are, of course, entitled to be paid for their work. And I consider myself fortunate to be able to do this work for no compensation. But my capacity to fund Reason to Resist is limited. Alas, I am not Elon Musk, nor do I want to be. From a financial perspective, I'd be satisfied if the monetization revenues simply covered the operating expenses of Reason to Resist. I don't need or seek an income from journalism. If there comes a time when the monetization revenue exceeds the expenses of operating Reason to Resist, then my current intention is to expand our team. For example, we could use a lot of help in terms of research for our reporting, and also in terms of the day-to-day management and also the supervision of our social media accounts. And naturally, any additional persons whom we hire to help in the job that we do will need to be compensated fairly. So I hope that that explains why we chose to monetize our channel. And I want to thank you for your understanding and for your wonderful support. And lastly, I want to share with you a conversation that I had with a Greek journalist in Athens on the day of my return to Greece. This journalist is passionate about the Palestinian cause, and she related to me, a very successful and outstanding journalist who has been reporting on Western imperialism for many years. She related to me how within the past 2 years, she's been targeted by Zionists in Greece, including a spouse of the former Israeli ambassador to Greece who works for the state media, and how this has impacted her negatively from a professional perspective. And then looking at me and saying in a distraught voice, she proclaimed, "Dimitri, what they're doing to Gaza is killing me. It's killing me," she said. Now, I know many of you, my friends, feel that way. There have been many days where I felt that my own soul is slowly being crushed by the horrors that we are witness and the impotence that we often feel in the face of this depravity. But I remain convinced, for objective reasons, not for reasons of fantasy, that Israel is doomed, its genocidal regime is in the process of collapse, and ultimately the Palestinian people, at immense cost to their well-being and to the people of occupied Palestine, will be free, and that will happen within our lifetimes. So please don't be overwhelmed by your pain and your deep horror at what we are witnessing every day in the Gaza Strip. Remain strong, my friends. Continue to persevere, and we will ultimately prevail, as will the Palestinian people. This is Dimitri Lascaris reporting to you from Greece on July 29th, 2025.